How about giving me some financial advice along with that water? Asked Marcus Bennett, not even bothering to look up from his phone as he laughed at his own joke. The Belmont restaurant in the heart of Manhattan was known for catering only to New York's elite, and he was used to being treated like financial royalty. Nina Carter paused, the crystal water pitcher suspended in midair. At 28, she had served hundreds of arrogant customers at this luxury establishment. But something in the man's dismissive tone struck a particular nerve. Actually, Nina said, her voice maintaining professional courtesy, while her dark eyes flashed with unexpected intensity. I would invest 40% in emerging market ETFs focused on sustainable energy, 25% in medical technology stocks currently undervalued by the market, 20% in commercial real estate funds in secondary metropolitan areas, 10% in agricultural commodities as a hedge against inflation, and keep 5% liquid for arbitrage opportunities. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus finally raised his head, his condescending smile freezing on his face. This was institutional-level financial analysis delivered with the precision of someone who knew global markets intimately. "Sorry, what did you say?" he muttered, now paying full attention to the woman he had seconds ago considered merely part of the decor. Nina poured the water with fluid movements. "You asked for investment advice. I just answered your question." The other executives at the table stopped their conversations. Marcus Bennett wasn't known for being challenged, let alone by a waitress. "Where exactly did you learn about emerging markets?" Marcus asked, his voice laden with genuine curiosity mixed with disbelief. Nina smiled, but there was something behind that smile that sent a strange chill down Marcus's spine. You'd be surprised what a person can learn when they don't underestimate the intelligence of others. The entire restaurant seemed to have stopped to watch. No one had ever seen Marcus Bennett put in his place like that. As Nina walked away, Marcus watched her with an expression that mixed confusion, reluctant respect, and something that looked dangerously like fascination. Over the next 15 minutes, Marcus did something that rarely happened in his privileged life. He paid attention to someone he considered inferior. "James," he whispered to his partner, "find out everything about this woman. Full name, background, where she went to school, who she worked with." James Torres nodded nervously. When something piqued Marcus's obsessive curiosity, he wouldn't rest until he had all the answers. When Nina returned to check if they needed anything else, Marcus was ready. "So, Nina," he said, reading her name tag with exaggerated deliberation, "I imagine you studied at Harvard or Stanford to gain all this knowledge about emerging markets, right?" Nina smiled. "Actually, I learned a lot by watching people like you make terrible decisions based on arrogance rather than data." The comment cut through the air like a blade. James choked on his wine and Marcus felt the blood rush to his cheeks. "Listen here." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but laced with menace. "I've been working in this city for 15 years. I know everyone who matters in the financial market. If you were someone relevant, I would know." Nina tilted her head slightly. The interesting thing about people in positions of power is how you confuse visibility with competence. You assume that if you don't know someone, that person can't be relevant. Are you trying to teach me a lesson in humility? A waitress? "I'm just observing behavioral patterns," Nina replied, clearing the empty plates. "It's fascinating how certain types of people react when their assumptions are challenged." As she walked away, Marcus pulled out his phone. "Carter, it's me. I need you to investigate someone. Her name is Nina Carter. She works at Belmont. I want everything." What Marcus didn't know was that Nina had worked as a senior quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs for 5 years before her life fell apart. She had developed trading algorithms that generated over $200 million in profits before being falsely accused of insider trading by her own supervisor, a white man who had stolen her work and needed a scapegoat when the SEC began investigating. The charge never resulted in a conviction. There was no evidence because she was innocent, but it was enough to destroy her reputation on Wall Street. No reputable firm would hire her after the scandal. The waitressing job was temporary, a way to survive while she rebuilt her life. Marcus had no idea that the woman serving his dinner had once managed client portfolios with net worths greater than his own. that she still had contacts in boutique hedge funds, that she studied Asian markets as a hobby, that her investment advice was based on analyses she did in the early hours using data from sources he never dreamed existed. While Marcus plotted to investigate her, Nina discreetly observed his table, noting how he gestures when nervous, how James always agrees with everything he says. More importantly, she had overheard snippets of their conversations about mergers and acquisitions, information that could be extremely valuable. 3 days after the meeting at Belmont, Marcus had in his hands a report that confused him more than it clarified. Nina Carter, 28 years old, no criminal record, a degree in economics from a second-rate community college, no previous experience in the financial market. This doesn't make sense, he muttered to James. No one develops that level of financial expertise by studying at night at a university that doesn't even have an MBA program. What Marcus didn't know was that at that very moment, 2 blocks away, Nina was sitting in an inconspicuous cafe, her fingers flying over the keyboard of an old laptop. On the screen, detailed information about Bennett Investments unfolded, financial reports, corporate structure, pending lawsuits, and something much more interesting. Suspicious trading patterns that suggested insider information was being systematically exploited. "Found anything interesting?" asked a familiar voice behind her. Nina smiled without turning around. "Hi, David. Punctual as always." David Chen sat down across from her, a young-looking Asian American with experienced eyes. A former colleague at Goldman Sachs and one of the few people who never doubted her innocence. "Bennett is investigating you," David said bluntly. "My contacts say he's obsessive." Nina opened the envelope he slid across the table. "Perfect. He's seeing exactly what I want him to see." "You planned this from the beginning?" "Not exactly. But when he humiliated me at that restaurant, I saw an opportunity. Men like Marcus Bennett have a giant blind spot. They can't accept that someone they consider inferior could be smarter than them." Over the next few days, Marcus intensified his campaign against Nina. He began frequenting Belmont regularly, always requesting a table in her section, always asking seemingly casual questions about markets that no waitress should know about. "So, Nina," he said one Thursday, interrupting her as she served a nearby table, "I read today that the Asian currency market is unstable. What's your take on the impact on commodities?" Nina paused, pretending to consider carefully. "Well, I believe the volatility of the yuan is creating arbitrage opportunities in the rare metals market, especially considering the new trade agreements with Vietnam." Marcus smiled with cruel satisfaction. "Interesting theory. Too bad Vietnam suspended those agreements 2 weeks ago. I imagine you don't follow the financial news as closely as you'd have us believe." Other customers looked in their direction. Nina lowered her eyes, seemingly embarrassed, and muttered an apology before quickly walking away. Marcus leaned back, satisfied. People like her need to learn to stay in their place. What Marcus didn't know was that Nina had deliberately given an incorrect answer, testing exactly how far he would go to humiliate her publicly. Every display of cruelty was being mentally catalogued as evidence of his character. More importantly, his constant appearances allowed her to observe his habits, overhear phone conversations, and notice details, like the fact that he always left his phone face up during important calls or discussed confidential business matters assuming the help was deaf and invisible. On one such occasion, Nina heard Marcus mention a special project involving a hostile takeover of a medical technology company. The details were vague, but enough for her to start connecting dots about suspicious movements in that company's stock. "He's setting up something big," she reported to David during another discreet meeting. "And based on the trading pattern I've identified, there are at least 6 instances of possible insider trading over the past 2 years. David whistled softly. "Those are serious accusations, Nina. We need solid evidence." "I'll get it," she said, her eyes shining with determination. "Bennett thinks he's hunting, but he's become the prey. Every time he tries to humiliate me, he's giving me exactly what I need to destroy him." The trap closed on a Thursday, exactly 3 weeks after the first meeting at Belmont. Marcus Bennett stood in his conference room surrounded by eager investors. presenting the final details of the hostile takeover that would be the deal of the century for Bennett Investments. "Gentlemen," said Marcus, pointing to the charts on screen, "our analysis indicates that MedTech Solutions is significantly undervalued. With our offer of $2.8 billion, we will have complete control of a company that is easily worth twice that amount." The Asian investors seemed impressed. That's when the door opened without warning. Marcus looked irritated at the interruption. Instead of his secretary, he saw Nina Carter calmly entering, no longer wearing her waitress uniform but an elegant executive suit. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice carrying authority that made everyone turn. "But I believe there is some crucial information you need to know before signing any documents." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Security!" "Don't worry, Mr. Bennett." Nina smiled, placing a briefcase on the table. "I won't take long. I just came to clear up some misunderstandings about who I really am." She opened the folder calmly. "My name is Nina Carter, but for 5 years I worked as Nina Davidson, a senior quantitative analyst at Goldman Sachs, specializing in emerging markets and financial fraud detection. I developed trading algorithms that generated over $200 million in profits before being falsely accused of insider trading by my supervisor." The room fell completely silent. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said. "You're a waitress. I've looked into you." "You investigated someone else," Nina corrected, removing documents from the briefcase. "An identity I built after my reputation was destroyed on Wall Street. But while you thought you were hunting me, I was collecting evidence of your illegal activities." She placed documents on the table. "Gentlemen, allow me to present evidence that Bennett Investments has been systematically using insider information for the past 2 years, violating SEC regulations on at least 15 documented occasions." "This is absurd," Marcus stood abruptly. "She's lying." "A waitress who listened to your confidential phone conversations for 3 weeks. Nina replied calmly. "A waitress who noticed how you always leave your phone face up during important calls, assuming that the help is deaf and invisible." She turned on her laptop. "For example, this recording from the 15th, where you discuss with your accountant how to mask the source of insider information about the Meridian Corporation merger." Marcus's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "No matter how you justify it in the books, just make sure they can't trace it back to our source at the SEC." Marcus's face had taken on an unhealthy pallor. The investors looked at each other nervously. "But wait, there's more," Nina continued, systematically destroying his reputation. "These are copies of emails between Bennett Investments and MedTech Solutions dated 6 months ago, long before any independent analysis justified this acquisition." The evidence piled up like an avalanche. Compromising emails, call logs, suspicious transactions, a clear pattern of market manipulation spanning years. "How did you gain access to—" Marcus began, then stopped, realizing he was incriminating himself. "You underestimated what a simple waitress was capable of," Nina replied. "Every time you publicly humiliated me, every display of arrogance, you were giving me exactly what I needed to expose your operation." Mr. Yamamoto, the leading Asian investor, rose slowly. "Mr. Bennett, is this true?" "It's an elaborate hoax," Marcus tried. "She's trying to blackmail us." "Blackmail?" Nina raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Bennett, I have already handed copies of all these documents to the SEC, the FBI, and 3 different financial journalists. The Wall Street Journal is scheduled to publish the lead story tomorrow morning." The statement hit like a bomb. Investors began murmuring among themselves, clearly alarmed. "I also took the liberty of informing the MedTech Solutions Board about the unauthorized communications. I imagine they will be fascinated to learn that your hostile takeover is actually a criminal conspiracy." Marcus clung to the table. "You've destroyed everything." "I've exposed the truth," Nina corrected. "The destruction is a consequence of your own choices. Every crime, every manipulation, every act of arrogance, it's all documented here." Marcus's phone began ringing incessantly, probably journalists, authorities, or angry investors. "But why?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking. "Why do this?" Nina looked at him with devastating serenity. "Because men like you believe they can humiliate and destroy people with impunity. because you saw a black waitress and automatically assumed she was inferior to you in every way, but mainly because someone needed to prove that underestimating the right people can be the most costly mistake you can make. As investors rushed out, canceling contracts and cutting ties, Marcus Bennett remained seated, watching 15 years of empire building crumble in minutes. The woman he had tried to humiliate had become the architect of his destruction, using every act of contempt as ammunition for revenge, as precise as it was devastating. Outside Bennett Tower, Nina called David. "It's done. The evidence is in the right hands. The press has the story, and Bennett has just realized that he is no longer the predator in this situation." 6 months later, Nina Carter sat in her new office on the 35th floor of a midtown skyscraper. A spectacular view of Manhattan stretching out before her. The plaque on the door read Financial Consulting CEO and Founder, and her company had already attracted 3 of the East Coast's largest investment funds as clients. The Wall Street Journal had featured her on its cover. The analyst who toppled an empire, how a former waitress exposed billions in fraud. Job offers came in daily from Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, BlackRock, all wanting to hire the woman who had demonstrated a unique ability to detect sophisticated fraud. David Chen, now her partner, entered carrying champagne. Marcus Bennett's final sentence just came down. 15 years in prison, plus $2.8 billion in fines and restitution. Nina nodded calmly, looking out the window. Across town, Marcus was probably in his cell, reflecting on how a simple waitress had orchestrated his complete downfall. Bennett Investments had gone bankrupt. His investors had abandoned him. His mansion in the Hamptons was being auctioned to pay legal debts. "You know what's most ironic?" Nina said, turning to David. He truly believed that humiliating people was a sign of superiority. It never occurred to him that each act of contempt was providing exactly the motivation necessary for his own destruction. The irony was delicious. Marcus Bennett, who had built his career by underestimating others, was defeated precisely by someone he considered irrelevant. His racial and social arrogance was not only morally repugnant, it was strategically suicidal. The phone rang. It was a journalist from Forbes wanting to do a story on her methodology for detecting corporate fraud. Universities were offering her tenure professorships. 3 publishers wanted her autobiography. Nina Williams turned 3 weeks of waitressing at Belmont into the biggest financial fraud exposure of the decade. Pierre, the restaurant's maitre d', had called the week before. "Miss Carter, we would like to name a dish after you. Perhaps something about justice served cold." Nina laughed at the memory. Even Belmont was capitalizing on her story, attracting curious customers who wanted to dine where the billionaire waitress had worked. Marcus Bennett had become a complete pariah. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid him. His ex-wife had filed for divorce, taking half of his remaining assets. "The best part," David noted, "is that he created the very monster that destroyed him. Every public humiliation he imposed on you strengthened your determination to expose him." Nina smiled, remembering the exact moment when Marcus sarcastically asked for financial advice. He thought he was toying with a helpless victim. In reality, he was feeding a predator far more intelligent and patient than he could ever be. The story had become legendary in financial circles. Lectures on the Bennett syndrome, when arrogance and prejudice blind executives to real threats, were given at business schools. The case became mandatory study on how underestimating people can literally be the most expensive thing anyone can do. Nina opened her drawer, pulling out a framed photo of her serving Marcus at Belmont, captured by a customer who had posted it on social media. It was a daily reminder that real strength doesn't need to shout. It whispers, observes, and strikes with surgical precision when the moment is perfect. Marcus Bennett tried to humiliate a waitress but ended up creating his own nemesis. Nina learned that true revenge isn't repaying the damage done, it's achieving success enemies could never imagine. If this story has inspired you to never underestimate the power of intelligence over arrogance, remember that the right people at the right time can completely rewrite the rules of the game.